Okay, well, good morning, good evening, good night, good afternoon, bonsoir, guten Nacht, guten Morgen, and buenas noches. Wherever you are in the world, this is Spiritual Technologies 2.0, and we have just a super interview, a dialogue coming up here with Steven Halpern, and I've heard of him and has been aware of his work for years, but I want to start off with, and by the way, my ever faithful companion and co-worker, Javi Otero, is the CTO of iWay Technologies, me being the CEO, is here with us today also. And all three of us are serious musicians, as far as I can gather, so this might be a little esoteric for you who are not so initiated. Anyway, I wanted to start with reading your bio, if that's okay, Steven, and sure. Good day.
Wonderful to be here.
Okay, Steven Halpern is an internationally acclaimed composer, recording artist, sound healer, author, and educator whose music is specifically composed to support relaxation, wellness, and sound health. He is a passionate advocate for the healing powers of music for spiritual growth and world peace. Halpern has produced over 60 recordings in the Inner Peace series and Soundwave 2000 Subliminal Self-Improvement series. Halpern's music is used in hospitals, hospices, holistic healing centers, homes, and businesses around the world. He is honored to contribute to the work of leading health professionals, psychologists, educators, business leaders, massage therapists, cancer counselors, success and creativity coaches. In recognition of his expertise and contribution to the field of therapeutic music and sound, Steven is now a member of the board of advisors for several leading online health and wellness websites. Steven's music has been heard on CBS TV's 48 Hours and ABC TV's 2020. Steven Halpern, PhD, is the author of Sound Health, Harper and Row, and the forthcoming Sound Healing in the New Millennium. Well, there it is. Wow. Exciting. So, Steven, can you just give us some of your background, your history, how you came to be on this path and doing what you're doing?
Absolutely. And as a musician, we will speak in non-technical terms because how I got into this work, though, was as a musician, not knowing about technology or the healing powers. Because when I started out, particularly in the early 60s, in high school, I was a trumpet player and got into electric guitar, playing jazz rock, R&B, and it was an intellectual as well as physical exercise. It was fun. It was not something I expected to do as a full-time job. It was what I was doing while I was getting ready to, I thought, become a dentist, something that would be dangerous, as it turns out, to myself and other people. So the world was safer as music became more important. What happened, though, is as I got into music, the music got more into me, and I started getting into those states where I became the music, where the connection between what I was thinking and what scales to play with which chords and all those rules became less important than the place that I got to, what we now call getting in the zone, with some of the high energy jazz and jazz rock music I was playing. One of my teachers said, if you're interested in that, you really ought to go back thousands of years and look into the ancient healing practices of music, in which music was used as a technology. So we're talking in ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, ancient China, things that were all basically forgotten or ignored in the 20th century and for the last 1,000 years. There wasn't much information to find. So I was reading old yoga books and occult information about the healing powers of sound. I found that most people didn't agree with each other, but there were fascinating concepts. And I found that in ancient Greece and ancient China, as with Pythagoras, the concept of using sound to change someone's physical state, someone's psychological state, and the most ancient uses of sound in ritual and ceremony to bring people in closer communion to the divine was something that just resonated so deeply inside me. I said, I want to know more about that. And I want to know what in the 20th century would correspond to what they were doing thousands of years ago. So that was part of my search. And in college, I was able to create my own curriculum to allow me to read everything that was basically available, and found out there wasn't much research. And there certainly wasn't much talking about sound as a technology. But as I would listen to Tibetan bowls and some of the chanting, and would relate that to some of my spiritual studies with meditation and learning about the science of brainwave technology, in which scientists would measure the electrical pulses of the brain in different rhythms that were more subtle than physical rhythms that we play in a band with drummers. The reality was that some of the sounds of Tibetan bowls and crystal bowls were clearly affecting my brainwaves and anyone who would be working with them. And I wondered why people weren't talking about this in terms of an ancient technology and what we can do to bring it update. Well, when I started recording, because people would ask me for recordings of what I would do in concert, when I started in 1973 performing publicly, there was no way to make a record because the studios owned all the recording equipment and the pressing plants. That changed in the beginning of 1975, and I was the first client in the first multi-track studio in the Bay Area that was available for independence. And as I started recording, I would notice both changes that would happen to me, and the fact that as an ex-New Yorker, a type A kind of moving fast kind of guy, when I wanted relaxation, I want it now. I don't want to wait 20 minutes. When I looked at what was happening in the field of music therapy, they said, well, if you listen to this music, this classical music for an hour, you could be relaxed. And I said, I can't wait that long. What do you have that'll get me there in a minute? And they said, that's impossible. You can't use music for that. And that got me into doing research that found out that you could use music to change your state virtually instantaneously, to get you into a balanced, coherent brainwave state, to help you meditate, to enhance your immune system, to decrease stress, if you had the right music. So my goal was to continue to research, compose, and record music that would first help me relax and get into meditative states, and then share that with others. And the feedback that I got was that whether I talked about it or not, people were experiencing that effect. And then I would have stores and distributors say, but we don't want you to talk about that on your albums because you're playing music, and music isn't scientific. Music isn't this. We don't want to read words. Just give us the music. Don't tell us anything about it. So there were 20 years or so when I was basically banned from really telling people what was going on. And in the 90s, politically, things started shifting. I mean, who wouldn't want to know about something that was legal, that was free, that was non-addictive, that you could use for yourself, that was effective in a very quick time frame? Well, people called the pharmaceutical industry, some of the medical authorities, because it took control away from them and gave it to the individual. So that was part of what I got involved with. And in order to do this, I had the good fortune, the good karma to be connected with and mentored by some of the leading scientists in the world in the field of new energy medicine and subtle energies. And this allowed me to be tapped into the leading edge of understanding spiritual technologies. And I was the guy that brought in sound as a musician that no one else was even talking about. So that's how I got to be at so many of the conferences and be the first one to go public with this.
Wow. And what products do you have now? I mean, what recordings, what do you have available, and what are you working on currently? And
Well, that's a great question. My first album, which I recorded on January 4th, 1975, was basically the same chakra balancing meditation that I have been sharing in concerts and private meditation groups. In fact, the first time I performed this was in a meditation group with Dr. J.J. Hurtak, who wrote the incredible book, The Keys of Enoch. And we were using sound to balance the chakras. That became my album, CHAKRA SUITE. And it originally came out, well, when it came out, stores said, we don't know what chakras are. You know, is that like Godiva chocolate or something? So I had to come up with another name, and that was Spectrum Suite, because I was also working with the electromagnetic spectrum of sound and color and chakras, which are all vibrational entities. This album has gone on to become the best-selling album in the genre of healing music. It's been copied, imitated, but never equaled, and it's gone around the world. Because there are no words and it works automatically, people would have experiences. And that's what I began with, and I've built on some of the compositional and performance protocols, which first includes getting me into a balanced, peaceful state, and then working with music. And this is really one of the keys, in which the training that I had as a musician was on one level put aside. In other words, if I sing, and this is where we were talking about being non-technical, if I sing this next series of ascending frequencies that most all of our listeners will understand and the viewers will understand, watch what happens in your body. So if I go do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, how many of you are holding your breath right now? How many of you heard that last note, do, in your head? You know what's supposed to happen. There's a melodic inevitability with that. Well, what my music did back in the beginning, and still does basically, it unhinges you from that predictability. Relaxation and healing only happens in the present moment. With most music, you're always projecting into the future. That anticipation, which is the basis of blues, you know when the turnaround is coming, you know when it's coming to the climax and starting over. With classical music, you know where the 5/7 dominant chord is going back to the tonic. I leave that alone in most cases and deal with the moment. I get into the space between the notes and the gap between thoughts, and that, in my most recent album, Mindful Piano, was one in which I get surprised. I went in to record one song with some new technology that the recording studio had just installed, and with the new reverb and echo combinations, it put me into a state that just, I couldn't stop playing. I literally could not lift my fingers from the keyboard. And we just kept going and going, and an entire album came out. So that's one of the things that's pretty brand new. And one of the other big theories that I've been working on, I should have taken the plastic off, Deep Alpha. In 2008, I started working again with the concept of adding brainwave entrainment technology, subtle tones that guide the brain of someone who's listening into a particular frequency, whether it's a meditative frequency in the 8 to 12 cycle per second range, which is called alpha. When we're speaking right now, that's called the beta range. Scientists have arranged and arbitrarily, or they've just counted the frequencies, because you can see them on an oscilloscope, how many times per second your brain is pulsing. When it slows down, you get into the theta range. When it slows down even more, you get into sleep, into the delta range. Well, all musicians encode their music with their own state of being and their own brainwaves, but no one talks about this. Most of them don't even know it. Music, one of the things that I learned early on is that music is a carrier wave for consciousness. So one of the other things that's part of all my recordings is that I need to be in a balanced state myself in order to play this kind of music. But when I started going back and adding the entrainment tones like I did, in fact, I did that on the interview that I had with 48 Hours in 1991, a big TV network here in America, CBS 48 Hours. It was so powerful. The producer was blown away. The on-screen host was blown away. Said, "Oh, we've got to share this with America." And I'm thinking, this is going to explode the field of brainwave entrainment and really take it out into the mainstream. Before, let me just back up a second. That was about the time of the Iraq invasion of Kuwait and all that first Gulf War. And by the time the show was aired, that producer had been fired. They cut out all the good stuff with all the, the statements of the producer on the screen. This is amazing. We could feel the difference. The same piece of music with entrainment and without entrainment, even though you wouldn't necessarily hear it. And this is the key, you could feel it. So for the last 7 years, I've been not just adding the tones to the background of the music, but this was my breakthrough in 2010. It took me so many years to figure this out. Why don't what's the difference between meditating or composing if you're in a deep alpha state or a deep theta state? And since the literature says that theta, for instance, is between 4 and 7 cycles per second, can you feel the difference if you're at 7 cycles, if your brain is resonating at 7 cycles, or 5 or 4? And what I had never done was to record while I'm listening to just the brainwave tones in my head. And that sounds like a little vibrato tone. Wah, 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 wah. So it's not something that's great to listen to. So then I would mask that, camouflage that with the sound of the ocean, combine that with the sound of the ocean, or a drone tone. But yet my brain was locked into that precise frequency. And I've got to tell you, when I was coming down, I could feel the difference between some of them. But when I got to one particular frequency, for me, and I don't know if this is true for everyone, but for me, I started literally hearing music in my head. And as a musician, that happens very rarely. I mean, usually you play and then you hear it. In this case, I would hear it first. And I was in such an attuned state that I looked at the engineer and said, "We're staying in that frequency for the rest of the session." And I have found that to be one of the keys of the next series of recordings that I've done. And that album is called Deep Theta. And people, it's been my best seller. In fact, it's still selling more than the Deep Alpha, which was Grammy nominated. People want to get into a deeply attuned meditative state. It's great for enhancing meditation and your immune system. It's great for speaking to your own consciousness, because when you're in a deeply relaxed state, you are more open to positive input. And when your brain is balanced, which happens with my music, when the hemispheres of the brain are working together rather than being left brain analytically dominant, you bring more of yourself, and it's a more efficient way to operate in the world. And that's really one of the things that my music does that most music doesn't do as much, because it's not intended to do that. I am less involved and interested in making music for entertainment than entrainment. In fact, when my Deep Alpha album was nominated for the Grammys, they kept telling me, "You've spelled entrainment wrong. Entertainment is spelled E-N-T-E-R." And I said, no, you're a musician. How could you not know what entrainment is? But most musicians don't. Here's for the non-technical. Anytime you listen to a drum beat, your heart is being entrained to the speed of that drum beat. You could feel your pulse. It's the most obvious and most ancient use of music was to entrain the heartbeat. Boom, 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 boom. That's why that beat is an amplified sound of the heartbeat, or the boom, 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 boom. And of course, now with EDM, the heartbeats are very, very hyper and very fast. Boom, 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 boom. But if you measure, and in fact, not technically, when I was starting out with this, I would watch in restaurants that people's mouths would chew at the same speed as the background music. And that's where the rubber meets the road. You find out that This is being used in advertising. It's being used in restaurants. Why would somebody want you to chew faster in a restaurant? Well, because they get more turnover. You eat your food quicker. You get out quicker. They could get more people in, and they make more profit.
Now you're sounding like a New Yorker.
Well, there we go.
Yeah. So death metal is a good thing for restaurants to play while their folks are eating.
That'll go the other way. In fact, one of the other things that happen when you play loud, fast music, though, it inhibits the flow of gastric juices so that you can't digest the food. And what I found as a musician, that if I would eat dinner and then go on the bandstand when I was playing with a R&B group, digestion processes in my body would stop. And they would basically tell me because of the byproducts, when you don't digest food properly, you get a lot of gas. And when you're on a small stage, the other guys will let you know that certainly no beans, certainly, you can't eat before the gig. So I was hungry at the end of the program, and I started researching, why am I having gas and they aren't? Well, my stomach was more sensitive. And that got me doing more research. And who has done research on these sort of things? Advertisers and restaurants and people who want to manipulate you in certain ways. I said, I don't want to be manipulated. What can I do to orchestrate myself on the spectrum of consciousness, as Gene Houston, one of my mentors, so eloquently put it? How can I create my own environment, and how can I orchestrate my own brain for higher productivity, higher creativity, more pleasure? And that was really where I was coming from. But I didn't use the word technology up until about the last 10 years or so, when people started understanding what brain waves were, or people started understanding what chakras were. Once yoga became a mainstream field in America and other countries, people suddenly understood what chakras were. So I retitled my album from Spectral Suite to Chakra Suite. Sales went up tenfold because people now were looking for something that would balance the chakras because they knew what it was.
We sent out a questionnaire to our community and asking what they were looking for in all these entrainment tools and everything. And I think the number one thing that came back was chakra balancing.
Really?
Interestingly enough, yeah.
Wow.
Hey, so I have some questions for you. As a musician, from what I understand, you're not using the score when you're creating your music.
That is correct.
You just get into this zone and you let it flow where it's going to flow or do what it's going to do, correct?
That is correct. In some cases, I will have a couple of threads of melody in my head.
Yeah.
But I usually go in as a blank slate. In the same way that Keith Jarrett talked about when he would go to a concert, he said he would feel the music coming in his left shoulder. I don't feel it in my left shoulder, but I feel it coming down. And in these series of recordings, I literally would feel it coming through the top of my head and out my fingers. And sometimes I wouldn't even hear what I was playing until playback. And there was sometimes, well, let me tell you also, how I compose is I will play a phrase, I will listen to the echoes and the reverberations, wait for that wave, that sound wave, and the envelope of the waveform to fade away. And in that sustained space, I will often hear some new harmonies, or particularly with grand piano, I will hear subtle melodies, and then that will tell me what the next phrase is. So I let the music tell me where it's going.
Right.
I don't impose a lot of things. Now, I know that I'm working modally. So if I'm working in as I do with a lot of these compositions in the key of C, my left hand will set up the octave to give me a root and a basis, a home base, as in any modal music.
Sure.
That's, of course, what's been done in Indian music and music around the world for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But a lot of the surprise, and for me, on the album Paradigm Shift, which happened right before this, a different melody came up that I had never played before. And as soon as I played it, it just took me out into a zone. I said, I'm just going to work on variations upon that. One of my teachers back in 1968 was the great jazz musician Ron Carter. And this was when pentatonic modes were coming into jazz through Coltrane and Miles Davis. He said, you have 5 notes. Your test at the end of the program, the class, you have to be creative for 5 minutes using just these 5 main notes. Mm-hmm. So how do you do that? Well, you go upwards and backwards and you do chromatic alteration. There are lots of games you can play. But for me, the ultimate game was getting into the space, playing some phrases, seeing where the harmonics interact, and then my fingers would often align in ways that I never even practiced in the recording session. So for me, the recording sessions have often been some of the breakthroughs that then I could hear and play in a more conscious state in concert, whatever, once I had done it. But I couldn't tell you 5 minutes before I played some of this music what I was going to do.
Now, do you have any data or anecdotal or otherwise? And I'm a musician, and my favorite thing is improvisational music. And I started with blues, and now I'm going into jazz, and I can base anything from them. Kind of the old blues guy said, blues is the roots, and everything else is the fruits. But anyway, I have found. And I've had the opportunity to play with world-class musicians doing this improvisation thing, and I get higher than a kite.
Yes.
And I'm doing the brain training.
Naturally, it's a natural high.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't believe it's legal. But and yeah, no bad after effects. But I started doing the brain entrainment a little over 10 years ago, and my creative just fearlessness and capacity and my ability to discipline myself to practice for hours and hours increased. But so at some point, the one started influencing the other, and now it's when I get into these states, I haven't hooked my brain up, but I know. I mean, it's just as you're brilliantly describing this place you get into where, I mean, you're just fearless. You just trust the process; it's coming through you. And yeah, there's some home notes or this or that and the other, or maybe you started out with a little melody that everybody knows, and then it goes into this range of stuff and resolves itself back at the end. But it's just tremendous. And there's a gentleman, a professor from Michigan. I can't remember his name. He wrote a integral jazz, and talking about this ability to improvise and enter into this zone of improvisational music is really one of the consciousnesses that we will need to facilitate in order to evolve into what we need to get through this time that we're living in. So I just think it's fascinating.
I totally agree with you. In my field, because most of the people came in and heard me playing CHAKRA SUITE or some of these other albums, most of them, until the internet, never knew that I was a jazz musician, never knew that I played trumpet, never knew that I played guitar. But I was asking questions early on of the musicians and people I would jam with and meet, people like Larry Coryell, or a great saxophone player named Joe Ford, who wound up playing with McCoy Tyner, was in my band at the University of Buffalo. We had the hottest 8-piece jazz rock band that was going to be the next Chicago.
Nice.
And there were times with that drummer and the bass player and listening to him that you had to, at that point, you have to have command of the instrument. That's the other thing we have in trumpet. You have to practice. You have to get the physical dexterity. You learn the rules, and then you forget them. And that's the other thing that you were saying. And only some of them were interested in the states of consciousness. No, man, we just play. We don't want to talk about it. And others would talk about it and would talk about the state that they get into, the clear, pure state and almost weightless, that when you're playing so fast or in that space, and it's right, as you say, it's amazing that it's legal. And it's that same thing that most musicians don't know, because they are reading little black dots on white paper written by dead white European musicians. And when I started talking about these things in terms of brain waves and relaxation and stress management, the music therapy field said, in 1973, only classical music is suitable for relaxation. And if you listen to this classical album, you'll be relaxed in an hour. And that's when I said, excuse me, I got research that shows I could get you there in a minute. And some of them loved that. And some of them said, get out of here. If you're not doing classical, we don't want to talk to you. In fact, there's a book that you may know about. This is Your Brain on Music.
Yes, I do.
a brilliant book in general. And the author, Daniel Levitin, talks about one of the great beauties of music is the anticipation response. And when I met him, I said, yes, that's great for most music, but when it comes to meditation, stress management, etc., that's exactly what you don't want, because you can't relax in the future. It's that waiting for the other shoe to drop, what I call the scalus interruptus phenomenon, where you're always off balance. And if you're off balance, there's tension. You look at the basis of Western composition, it's tension and release, tension resolution. Well, as an ex-New Yorker, I got enough tension. I don't want you to add more tension. I want to go straight to the thing. They said, you can't do that. I said, well, then I'll start my own field in which I'm allowed to do that. And that's how I helped become one of the founding fathers of New Age music. But there was meditation music in other cultures, but it was always maybe a Tibetan bowl. And again, if you listen to a Tibetan bowl, they had one right here, there'll be some pulsations. Well, to me, that's a technology, because the sound of that bowl when would orchestrate and train your brain. So the ancient monks knew that, but they didn't talk about it as a technology. When I heard the Fender Rhodes electric piano and that beautiful vibrato the first time, it took my brain and shifted me right into a meditative state. I said, this is like a Tibetan bowl on steroids with keys that I could play, because it gets kind of boring when you only have one note. Just like a mantra for an improvising jazz musician, I want to do more variations. But with a keyboard, I could do that and have the tone. So that was why the Rhodes electric piano, which is basically a series of tuning forks, has been the basis of so much of my music. And once the recording technology allowed us to take a grand piano and put it in like a cathedral setting, then I was able to work with grand piano in a meditative way. Grand piano is known basically as a percussive instrument and a melodic instrument. And I use it more almost as a synthesizer to create new sounds. And there are some things on a mindful piano. We'll listen to some of the tracks, the track 1 with the ocean, or track 11, where I'm building a cathedral of sound and going up harmonic tensions. And even if I don't play the physical note to end a phrase, you will hear it end as the harmonics coalesce in the sustain. And you can't do that fast. You have to leave time and space for the music to unfold. And that's what Deepak Chopra and Wayne Dyer would agree when they talk about getting in the gap between thoughts. I said, that's always what I've done when I'm recording. I'm getting in that gap between the sounds. And you can't read a score because that shuts you off from being in the moment as you're playing. So in answer to your question, the score is inside me, and I'm playing my own nervous system. I'm playing my own brainwaves.
And you know, just as we have, I think, 188,000 genes, they finally identified them. They're coming to realize that it's not so important. The genes are, you know, somewhat significant, but what's more significant is how you manifest them and how you express them moment to moment with epigenetics. It's like you can have the piano, but it's what you do with it, with the technology and that creative interaction. And it's amazing how, as we are evolving and understanding the brain and entering to this time of transition where there's so many of us on the planet and so many of the old mimetic conflicts of the planet are coming into fruition with new technologies and all this stuff, we are producing at the same time the technologies that we need to create the stuff that we need to create. I mean, exactly. It's so evolving. It's just fascinating.
Right. And I think the fact that the popularity of using these kinds of tools is increasing is because people want things that work. And at a certain point, and again, as referenced early on, they don't care about the theories. They don't care necessarily even why. They know if they put this song on, and if they only have 5 minutes to meditate or 5 minutes to reduce their stress, they don't have 20 minutes to get into the state where you'll be relaxed. We want instant access. Back in the day when MTV was coming, I want my MTV and I want it now, was one of the big slogans. Well, I want my relaxation. I want my meditation now. So before I meditate now, where I also have my Tibetan bowl and my Japanese temple bowl, I will put on my music for a minute as I'm getting ready to sit on my meditation pillow, so that my brain is already in the state. And when I sit down and get into the silence, I'm right there. It's the most time-effective and cost-effective way of getting the most out of a little bit of time. And again, I look at some of that as being my New York heritage. I don't have time to waste. I want to get right there, be in the state. And when I need to write a new ad, or as I often do, write articles, I have some of this music playing in the background. And I can't, I mean, it's difficult to give you an absolute example of this breakthrough happened when I was listening to this, but I am more focused, and I'm able to bring more of the information that I have in my head into a state where I can access it. And that's what I do when I'm writing my monthly newsletters, when I'm writing articles. And it was a couple of years ago that I started talking about spiritual technology. And then I was quite surprised during the Super Bowl last year, 2 years ago, when there was an ad that came on talking about spiritual technology.
Wow.
Remember seeing that?
I think I do, yeah.
And then you remember who, then the logo comes up behind it, Scientology. I go, whoa, well, they call, obviously what they're doing is a technology. They don't own the word technology, but tying it in from sound, and I don't know that they use sound, but it was a spiritual technology. Well, meditation is a spiritual technology.
That's right.
You know, yoga, and some yoga teachers talk about yoga as a body-mind technology. But then we got scared about the word technology. But it's a coherent and a focused and a knowledgeable way of working with what is. And as we're learning more about, as you mentioned, epigenetics, what I find and what I take from the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton, who wrote The Biology of Belief, I'm sure you're familiar with, and now Deepak Chopra and Rudolph Tanzi in the book Super Genes take a lot of this information and put it out there for the masses. But those of us who've been at the conferences with Bruce and other people for the last 15 years or so have been incorporating this into our lives. And for self-benefit, even something as, on one level, insignificant as clearing clutter, an issue that many of us have been dealing with, in speaking to our genes and our consciousness with subliminal affirmations in a theta state, I have made breakthroughs in starting to clear my clutter and organize my physical space in ways that I've been reading, that I've been wanting to do for 10 years. I've read the books. I have a lot of books that sometimes even get covered up by other books and that clutter it up. That what the concept of speaking to your genes, when I asked Bruce Lipton, how do you speak to your genes? He said, what language do you use? What formula? Whatever. He said, no, man, you just use English. Your genes I said, how could that be? He says, we don't know, but it works. That's it. It works. So when you in order to get to the subconscious mind is most receptive to positive input from yourself or other people in a relaxed state. But that's also why some TV shows and other things, or a lot of ads, may have some of this entrainment technology going on to get you into a state where their ads will be more effectively imprinted into your consciousness, and you'll be programmed. Why do you think they call it TV programming? Because that will go into your brain. And as I said, I mean, people are just interested. The book by Dr. Brian Wilson Key called Subliminal Seduction in 1973.
Right, I remember that.
Blew the field out. And some of that information now is on Dr. Eldon Taylor's website. Most people don't know it, but to this day, this is a visual technology that has subliminal artwork in just about every liquor ad. That if you really look at liquor ads, you will see little skull and crossbones and bats and sexual activities and sexual organs. You won't believe what's been subliminally airbrushed in. Well, that's a technology, and it's highly effective.
Hey, Steven, let me go back to what you just said. I thought it was fascinating. You talk about speaking to your genes.
Yes.
Can you give us a practical example of what that would look like?
Okay. Clearing my clutter is a form of self-care. When I read that in one of the books, it wasn't in an affirmation, but I reversed it, talked, and put it in an affirmation, and recorded that on my cell phone with my music in the background. And once a day, I'd call myself, I'd listen to that. So I would speak audibly, and that's one version. And then another time I would speak further away so that the mic, my voice was much softer and went in subliminally. So just things like, I am relaxed. Every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. Some of the classic phrases, but when you can hear the words, and this is one of the keys, when you can hear the words, your conscious mind, for other reasons of your past programming, whether it was your father who was saying, you can't do that, or you can't play the trumpet, or where's the melody? You'll never be as good. So all those things that we've been programmed by family and friends over the years, your conscious mind will bring that up. If you need to lose weight, I can't lose weight, I'll always be fat. That's the kind of self-talk that we tell ourselves all the time. The positive way is saying, I am relaxed. My heart is beating normally at a perfect rhythm. My energy is fine. My concentration and focus are impeccable. I remember all that I need to remember. So there are ways that you can write your own affirmations. In fact, you asked what some of my most recent projects are. I started working a couple months ago on pain relief, on another album to update albums that I've had, but now for manifesting optimal health. Some of the same things that super genes talk about, but I've had these affirmations in an album called Radiant Health and Wellbeing since 1991. I can now make that even more effective by adding some of the new music that I have with the entrainment, adding new affirmations, and it's been phenomenal. So that's one of the reasons I create soundtracks for people to use, but also encourage them to write their own, speak in their own voice, and even using their iPhone or some of the technology that's so easy now to just make a simple series of 1, 2, or 3 affirmations to get started. And I will tell you that when I work on on the project for enhancing creativity, I have my starting script, and I just get into such a creative zone. I'm just spontaneously making new affirmations, and I have to listen to the audible version to know what I just said. But it just flows and flows. So literally, I am embodying being more creative at the time that I am producing an enhancing creativity soundtrack. And that's how I know it works.
Yeah, you know, I've been using this technology as a part of my daily practice for over 10 years now, and creativity ain't an issue anymore. Now, sometimes I'm starting to write a new book, and I think, well, you know, maybe I have self-doubts or something from my old stuff. But when I put pen to paper, when I get down there, it just starts flowing out like a river. It's really ridiculous. And that was the way, you know, my first book was. And I used it with this technology. I would sit down and I'd write some notes, and then I would go and dictate it to my assistant. And she said I was doing the Winston Churchill thing without the brandy and cigars. You know, I'd pace back and forth and dictate. It was great. But yeah, I thought, well, I'd written this 38-page paper, and I said, well, maybe that's all I have to say. And I could still be writing that book today. Thank God I've got it published.
Yes.
There was just so much. You look at something, and it becomes infinite in that capacity just to keep revealing itself. And going back to music, I heard Keith Richards in an interview said that the guitar neck was infinite. You know, you could not just ever master this thing, the permutations and the creativities and the tones and the depth. And I find that more and more in just any field. that I focus on, it just begins to reveal itself and just gets deeper and deeper and deeper.
One of the ways that people say, well, how do we know if something's working? Well, obviously, in real time, you may find it hard to know that your immune system is getting better or that you're losing weight or achieving your ideal weight. Falling asleep. I have a subliminal and a brainwave entrainment album, Sleep Soundly. Sleepscape Delta is another one. How do you know it's working? If you fall asleep by the third song and don't hear the end of the album, it's working. You know, you don't need to hear you want the result. How do you know that something isn't working? If you listen to some classical music, as I was doing even when I was in high school, because I read that classical music makes you smarter. Well, that was dreamt up by a marketing guy. It was not based on real good research. And for me, I'd be reading a text or reading a book, and I notice that I'm reading the same sentence over and over and over. That's how I would know that it's making me not smarter, and I can't focus. Anytime the information is going in and out, you're wasting your time. That's when you need more focus. When you want to listen to music for enjoyment, do that. But when you want to use it as a technology, use the right music. Find what works for you.
Javi.
Hey, I'd like to ask you a question about your chakra balancing album.
Yes.
How important do you think frequency is? Because many times there are chakra balancing tracks that are, they use different frequencies, for example. And I wonder if perhaps there's a lot more to do to what you shared at the beginning, that sound becomes a carrier of intention. So how important is frequency? How important is the other, intention and sound? Or maybe you have another explanation for why there are so many very scales and frequencies used for the same purpose.
Great question. Thank you. With traditional Chinese medicine, they will take the pulse of the light pulse and a deeper pulse. With your skin, you have a layer on the outside, and then you have skin that's right underneath the epidermis. They're both operating at the same time. With as I mentioned, with the pulse, they are both simultaneously happening. With the chakra frequencies, the system that I use is an ancient one that many spiritual traditions have used. I did not invent it, but I started checking out some of the other systems early on. In the system that I use, that begins at the first chakra, that also generally in many spiritual traditions starts with the color red and relates to the keynote of C. Now, technically, why would the key of C make sense? As a musician, I went through a couple of years in New York where we would not play any music in the key of C because it was too common. It was too easy. It was too boring. It turns out that the keynote of C resonates and relates to the fundamental harmonic of the earth itself, the Schumann resonance, about 8 cycles per second. And if you take the octaves of about 8 cycles per second, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, you come up to middle C of about 256 cycles per second. And that's basically where Western European music is now. It's 261 point something or other, but it's essentially around that. And that's bringing up another topic of should music be tuned into the C at 256 or A 432 cycles rather than A 440. That's another discussion. But if I'm going on another energy level, and let me give you another answer. There's an internal congruity when you start with the key of C at the base of the spine, and then working with the research of Dr. Itzhak Bentov, the great inventor. He invented machinery that could measure chakra resonances. So on one level of physical reality, this first chakra resonates in a harmonic of the frequency of a keynote. So I'd say that's an external validation of that frequency. Now, on the next, that's perhaps the most fundamental physical level of the aura, the electromagnetic energy field. When you go to the second level, it's reversed. And that's where some of the confusion comes in. I've had other people told me, I had to make up my own system because you already used your system and I wanted to do something different. So it wasn't that it was right, but he wanted to have his own. And a third aspect is that there's a system as a whole. So what if you read Bentoff's book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, and he was, again, one of my personal mentors. He allowed our research team to use him as his proprietary apparatus that no one else had access to. We could see that once you start tuning the first chakra, your body itself begins to shift into what's known as a tuned oscillating system, where it begins to pulsate as a standing wave. And I don't know that some of these other systems have done that research. I don't know that they will get that result. They may, and it may work. And one of the other great principles is different strokes sometimes work for different folks. And Beethoven said, for him, the color, the keynote of E was silver. It wasn't red, orange, yellow, but many other cultures and many aura readers and psychics will see yellow in the solar plexus, where the name itself relates to and the work of Roland Hunt in England around 1900, working with this system, said, you know what? A disease of the area of the body that relates to the yellow, again, starting in red, orange, yellow, puts your organs in that area, like the liver. What is a disease of the liver? It's yellow jaundice. And isn't it interesting that the keynote, the frequency, and the color in his system, my system, etc., relates to a disease that happens in that system?
Steven,
so, yeah.
Do each of the chakras correspond to a note, just like the root chakra C?
Yes, and I was quite surprised when I would read the early literature, and it's just up the scale: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then you start the next octave, and then you could get into, well, are there only 7 octaves in the new millennium? Is there an 8th chakra? Is there another level going on? Well, probably yes, but it's hard enough just to tune into 7 chakras. But once you get into that happening, there's an energy field that happens in your body where the blood that goes out of the heart, pulsing the brain, sets up an electromagnetic field around the brain that's related to about 8 cycles per second, that then entrains to the dominant energy frequency of the planet, again, the Schumann resonance.
Right.
And that is part of what you get into in meditation and can fine tune with these other areas.
And can you play all these keynotes together and form some kind of chord that kind of resonates all the way up and down the energy system?
My experience is I think you get into dissonance at that point.
Yeah.
You know, so that's not the case. But even in the key of C, what I found is if I'm working with just even one chakra, because, and as a musician, people say, well, if I can only listen to one chakra, what should I listen to? And I would say the key of C, because that's fundamental and that's what the spiritual teachers say. But I have found, working with other keynotes, with the pentatonic scales, you don't get into those dissonances. And within any tonal center, I work in a major pentatonic scale relating to each keynote. I can create a balance where your body will shift into a coherent state. And no matter, well, I haven't had the biofeedback backup to this, but what it feels like is, and having worked and being on good terms with most of the keynotes, I will admit that I don't do a lot of work in C sharp or A flat, not my favorite keys. But I have had deep meditations at the keyboard and other things, unlike guitar playing, where E, A, and D, G are your main go-to, keys. In F, in G, in A, in B flat, in C, in D minor. And some, obviously, as a keyboard player, are easier to just close your eyes and play. For the Ray Charles effect, the Stevie Wonder effect, you can't hit wrong notes per se if you're playing the modal aspects. But again, it's an energetic, and it's also what I am doing because I am balanced when I'm playing. if I'm not balanced, the notes can be right. And that's where intention is so important.
Yeah.
If I am thinking, and I've had this happen in the studio, when I would whip out a really incredible arpeggio, I would think, wow, I've never done that before. Right away, the next note I play is wrong. And it's an obvious mistake. Now, you never hear that because we edit that out. In the old days, we'd pick it up and cut in, and now we just, splice it out, pick up the edit. So
if you're playing live, though, you got to take what you did wrong and make it right.
Right. And as a jazz improvising musician, there have been times in concerts that has happened. And I remember the first time it happened, I thought to myself, oh, this is the worst concert I've ever played. And at the end, people come up and say, oh, that was the best thing we had such an amazing meditation. And I started to say, well, didn't you hear that mistake I played? And I said that to one. They said, no, we didn't. And that was a major breakthrough for me, because what I heard in my head was my father's voice at the one concert that he came to, in 1977, when I was playing with some of the first of these consciousness events. He said, oh, that third song, you made a mistake. You played a wrong note. I said, yeah, but I played 2,000 right notes. He was one of those guys who was focused on what was wrong. I go for the effect. And as a musician, Larry Coryell was one of my mentors with that. He said, you go for it. If you hit a wrong note, Miles Davis, the same thing, would say, we want you guys to explore, take risks.
Absolutely.
Don't worry about a wrong note. Go for the entire aspect. So that's where I go with it. And in live concert, I have learned how to disguise that. And no one has ever come up to me after that day and said, oh, in that third song, you made a mistake. And I know sometimes, particularly if it's cold or the piano isn't a good one, it doesn't work as smoothly as my keyboard. I don't want to play a thick, clunky Baldwin because I can't do the gossamer things, the gentle things that I do. So that's how I would answer that.
And let me, let me kind of maybe sum up, man. Thank you. This has been really, really inspiring. I'm really jazzed in the best sense of the word. So
yes, intention is very important, but intention plus musicianship. It's not just intention.
Yeah, exactly. And that was kind of the point I was leading to. I was at a concert with David Darling, who is a great spiritual cellist, master. Oh. And I never heard of him before. This shows you how educated I am.
Check out my relaxation suite out, my feature.
I was invited to a pre-show hors d'oeuvre fest or something, and I was standing next to the cheeses and the fruits and whatnot, and this little guy came up, and we started talking. And turned out it was David Darling, and I said, I'm a musician too, and I said, I know, you're known obviously around here as a master and so good, and I said, do you still have to practice? And he got this. He had this appearance of just holy awe came over him, and he said, oh yes, all the time. And I went, me too. Then we started talking about practice and how that's transformational in music and everything. But you would think, you get to this point where you're just the master of your instrument, acknowledge that, and he just got very humble and almost like holy fear or respect to the whole process. And he said, oh yes, I practice all the time.
Yeah. A lot of musicians are that way. And then there are some, and I've known some of them, and sometimes I'm certainly in that field where I just don't have time or access to a keyboard. So when I'm traveling to a concert, it might be a week. I haven't touched the keyboard. I get off the plane. I go to the concert hall, and I have to be there from the first note. And I've developed the ability to get into that state, but technically, what I could do in concert would be more interesting to me as a musician if I have had a chance to practice. And just even as a musician, and this is one of the other things I learned early on, hold your instrument. If you're a guitar player, when I watch TV, I don't just watch TV. I'm holding my guitar or my bass. Even if I'm not playing it, it's in my hand. When I was playing trumpet, my teacher said, hold your trumpet. When you're, watching TV, when you're doing, you want it to become an extension of your nervous system. I have a keyboard near my TV watching area where a small one, I could just have it on my lap. So I just have my hand on the keyboard, and there's a familiarity. There's an energetic exchange that's happening that many musicians don't know about. They don't get taught that. But I find that if you can't practice, just at least have an instrument around and be in that state, and then working with intention, your focus. What are you trying to do? And the intention of the heavy metal and the death metal people are very different. So it's like, choose your, medicine or your poison. And some people need that. Other people need that. Bottom line is find out what works for you and bring more of that into your life and honor the music and the instrument as a musician, and the place of honor and attunement with the place that it can take you to.
Yeah, I can't travel without my guitar. I have my Stratocaster. It's a pain in the ass. Every time I go someplace, I got a lot, and that's why I became a guitar player, because I left home very early and I wanted to be a keyboardist, but you can't put your piano on your back and, stick your thumb out and head down the road. So that was the hence why I became a guitarist. But
interesting.
Such a fantastic. I wonder how many hours have you ever thought that you put in playing and practicing on keyboards in your life?
No, I can't tell you that, but I can tell you that summer when I was taking the course with Ron Carter, the first Black Studies Jazz Creativity Composition class at University of Buffalo, all brand new, I asked the question, well, how much are we supposed to practice? He said, if you're serious about being a musician, you practice 8 hours a day. And I said, Mr. Carter, I'm going to school. I have to work. He says, fit that in.
Brilliant.
You have to practice 8 hours a day. And that was the summer that I practiced 8 hours a day, 4 on trumpet, 4 on guitar, because I didn't have a keyboard at that point. And I went from being a really good trumpet player to being a trumpet player that could jump on stage with anybody and play with anybody. And that's how I got to sit in with Larry Coryell and so many other people, Rahsaan Roland Kirk, jazz greats, because I knew how to play. I could play. I got to the state, but it was 8 hours a day all summer. There was the first time I had an apartment to myself. That was also key, where I wasn't disturbing other people, but it was that focus. 8 hours a day. You want to get serious about this? That's what you need to do. So I always honored them. When I saw him 20 years later at a jazz concert, I went up to him and reminded him and said, oh, yes, I remember that.
Well, that's so inspiring. And whether, you want to become a world-class musician or a world-class meditator or a deeply spiritual person, you got to put in the time, you got to put in the hours, and aided by the current technology and the tools that we have now, that you still have to put in the time, but the progression could be so much more complete and so much quicker and so much more successful. And because of the rapid progress, as when you started playing that 8 hours a day, you get inspired, and progress engenders progress, and discipline engenders discipline, and discipline becomes freedom.
Right.
It all works together. Brilliant.
If I could add one other thing here, one of the ways that I produced the Deep Theta album as well as the Deep Alpha album is that the last tracks are more ambient, meaning I have less electric piano, less melody. It's more just the background kind of wash of synthesizers, the bed with the ocean, maybe with the tambura and the entrainment. And what I often do is I loop that. So there's no distraction factor going on, but it sets an energetic field. And I will sometimes keep that on when I'm writing, where I don't even want to listen to even a little bit of melody. I just want to have that field, the energetic field for meditation or for creative writing or whatever, just there. And the music becomes transparent. That's another key for me, that the music becomes transparent. People tell me, we forget that the music is on. When you're listening to classical music, the oral wallpaper, whether it's rock, pop, or classical or jazz, if it's on in the background, part of your brain is always paying attention to it and distracting you from your focus. I want something that becomes invisible and transparent.
That's right.
Holds my focus. And that's why, for myself, I always I researched these things and worked with them for a couple of years before I went public with it. And it worked the first day. It works 5 years, down the road. It will continue to work, and that's one of the things that makes music such an incredible value. And you can't get this. You can't go on Pandora and hope that one of my songs will come on. You need to have your own sources. You need to have your own digital downloads or CD so that you have it when you need it. And also, as you well know, the amount of money we get paid by Pandora and Spotify and whatever is in thousands of a penny. So it's a really better, it's a more equitable and more conscious energy exchange to support musicians who are working with things rather than taking all the money and just letting Pandora make all the money with it.
Yeah, and we need to be wrapping this up, but I want to ask you one last question. Is I have you here, and this is something that's always fascinated me. What happens? What is the power of harmony?
A good question. I don't have an easy answer for that, but it changes certainly. And you know, I mean, if I had the keyboard right here, I could tell you that ordinarily, if you have a half step, a B and a C, that's going to be a dissonant. It's jangly. But if I play a C major 7 chord, I can make that be a very beautiful sound. So it depends on what it was. You know, early was 1,500 years ago, a major interview, the do, re, mi, the major third interview was called demonic. And that's why you don't hear that in Gregorian chant and early music. The church said that is an illegal, a demonic, a devilish harmony. And then it changed. And then other people say, well, minor chords make you sad. Well, old style minor chords, minor modes, a lot of the music of the world is in a minor mode, and it doesn't have anything to do with sad. So these are Western European values that have been built and imposed upon other music. Choose what works for you. Again, the bottom line is pay attention to what works for you. All I would do is, you know, try things, feel it, see how it works. And if it doesn't, go on to something. But when it does, have that in your, just like I have herbs in my kitchen for cooking, I want different kinds of music in my musical medicine chest to go to. And that's certainly what I do. And I recommend that to others.
All right, Steven, thank you so much. Anything you want to close with that you didn't get, you know, when it left in the tube?
Okay. We're going to give people, we're going to put some samples in.
Absolutely.
The longest website, the longest samples on the internet, as far as I know, and certainly the highest quality, are on my website, stevenhalpern.com. Amazon and some of the places have the 30-second things. For many of our songs, their technology only takes the first 30 seconds of a track. And many times the first 30 seconds are just setting the stage for the real music to begin. So I have more intelligent, more musical samples. And then you can buy them from Amazon or iTunes or any of the other places, or CDs. But you want to get a chance to listen. And when you're listening, and this is one of the other things for the folks, give your full attention to the music. Be ready to receive the blessings of the music rather than always have the music on as oral wallpaper, modern music of your own making. Use that sometimes, but give yourself the time to be present with the music, and then you'll find the presence that gives to you an amazing ROI, an amazing return on your investment of time and money.
Brilliant. Hey, Javi, did you have anything else?
No, I just thought that was beautiful. The listening, you know, the importance of listening, because you use music as a healing art.
Yes.
And somehow consciously listening to a piece, if it's, you know, healing enough, you can make it healing music as well. And I wonder actually, because you kind of reintroduced that concept to the West, or you helped doing that, you know, music as a healing art.
Yes.
As you shared. What are you aware of projects that might be doing similar things now, being at the Fringe or exploring technologies, or I don't know, projects that you might be particularly excited about, the work of somebody who might be doing what you started doing 30 years ago?
I don't know that we have time to get into all of it, but people that I respect are people like Dr. Jeffrey Thompson is doing some wonderful work. There's finally more interesting things going on out there. But when you check the internet and you get into entrainment, I hear a lot of things that just sound like blah, 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 and that hurts my stomach. So if I have a general rule, if it hurts my stomach, I'm not interested in it. You know, that's just, I'm a lover, not a fighter. I'm into pleasure, not pain. That's painful. I don't like stomach pump music. It doesn't work for me. And, you know, so I go the pleasure route.
Yeah, the beauty.
Yes, beauty rather than, you know, ugliness or something else.
Yeah.
Beauty in music.
Well, Stephen, it's been really inspiring. It's been a pleasure and really been an honor. So,
thank you. I really
thank
enjoyed
you
it.
so much from the depth of your experience and your spontaneous flow and your wisdom. It's just been great, and I'm sure everyone out there is really going to get a charge and a transmission and an inspiration. And we will include all your contact information here on the screen, and then of course people are going to be listening to the music also. So it's not
Right.
just the talking about it. Although I do think you transmit some of your music just when you speak about it. So thank you very much,
John. Thank you. A pleasure.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye now.
you.